The trouble began long before the first letter arrived, though no one in the neighborhood realized it. For months, subtle signs had emerged around the old oak tree at the edge of the yard. Birds stopped nesting there. Squirrels avoided its branches. Even neighborhood pets behaved strangely when they approached its shadow. Most people dismissed these small oddities. After all, the tree had stood tall for decades, surviving storms that tore roofs apart and winds that bent street signs. But something about the tree had changed, and the first entity to truly sense it was the HOA. The HOA didn't see the danger, not the real one. Instead, they saw an eyesore, a perceived threat to their carefully curated image of uniform perfection. To them, the tree was simply too old, too large, too wild. It stood out in a neighborhood obsessed with beige fences, matching mailboxes, and lawn heights measured down to the fraction of an inch. The first notice shoved into the mailbox declared the tree structurally unsound and unsafe. It was a bold accusation, especially given the lack of evidence. But the HOA had become known for acting first and justifying later. The homeowner ignored that letter. Trees didn't get condemned based on someone's personal dislike, but the HOA wasn't finished. More notices arrived, each one written with greater urgency, each one listing escalating fines if the tree wasn't removed. Behind these letters was the force of an HOA president notorious for her crusade against anything that challenged her vision of the neighborhood. Over the past year, she'd gone after sheds, basketball hoops, front porch decorations, flower colors, even parked cars that she considered disruptive. The old oak was her new target. Meanwhile, the homeowner noticed something far more concerning than the HOA's obsession. Leaves at the base of the tree appeared darker than usual, too dark. Patches of the yard near the trunk felt soft beneath the boots, almost like the ground had been quietly hollowed over time. Evening breezes carried a faint, earthy smell that didn't belong in a clean, suburban setting. Something was happening underground, something hidden. But the HOA didn't care about hidden things. They cared about control, and they were determined to win. Soon meetings were held, decisions were made behind closed doors, and the final notice arrived like a verdict. The tree must be removed within 14 days or the HOA would remove it themselves and charge every penny back to the homeowner. Defeat became the only practical choice. Fighting meant endless fees and legal battles too expensive to pursue. So the removal was scheduled. The morning the workers arrived, the sky seemed unnaturally heavy. Not storm clouds, just a thick, oppressive stillness, as if the neighborhood itself sensed what was coming. The crew circled the tree, assessing it. The trunk towered over them, massive and proud, unaware of the fate the HOA had forced upon it. Chainsaws roared to life, and within minutes, branches that had stretched across decades came crashing down. Neighbors watched from windows and porches. Some shook their heads. Others pretended not to care. But a few, especially the old-timers, looked devastated. They remembered when the neighborhood didn't have an HOA, when nature wasn't considered a violation. Piece by piece, the tree was dismantled. But it wasn't until they cut near the lower trunk that the tone of the workers changed. Their movements slowed. Their expressions tightened. Something inside the wood had caught their attention. The homeowner approached, sensing tension. The inner trunk, once expected to be solid, was bizarrely hollow. Not just hollow carved, eaten. Dark streaks lined the inside like tendrils of decay. The workers tapped the wood with gloved hands, and the sound was disturbingly empty. Whatever had been weakening the tree wasn't normal rot. It looked unnatural, dense, almost oily. A worker sliced deeper, revealing more hollow space, and then something far worse. Underneath the stump, the soil collapsed slightly, revealing a tunnel narrow, perfectly rounded, and stretching far beneath the yard. It didn't look like the work of rodents or natural burrowing animals. The walls were smooth. The pattern was deliberate. The direction was intentional. The tunnels branched out like veins, running deep beneath the property and stretching outward toward the street, toward the sidewalks, toward the homes, toward the HOA president's house. A chill passed through the homeowner. The tree had been hiding something, containing something, Removing it had exposed the network underneath. As the workers cleared away more debris, the soil shifted again. Another tunnel opened. Then another. Thin cracks spread across the surface of the yard like a spiderweb, signaling instability below. Whatever lived under the tree had been spreading, growing, digging. The homeowner realized that the tree's roots, extensive and powerful, may have been the only thing preventing the ground from collapsing. For years, the roots had grown around the tunnels, weaving support structures around the weakness beneath. Cutting the tree had removed the only anchor holding the subterranean network together. The HOA hadn't just forced the removal of a tree, they'd forced the removal of the neighborhood's natural support system, and now, the damage was beginning to reveal itself. The workers, clearly unsettled, stopped cutting. They refused to continue until an inspector could be brought in. The ground around them felt unstable, shifting in subtle, unpredictable ways. Neighbors began to step outside, drawn by the commotion. Some gasped as they saw the hollow trunk. Others stared at the spreading cracks in the lawn. And a few exchanged uneasy glances toward the HOA president's home at the end of the street. A deep rumble vibrated beneath the ground. Faint, but unmistakable. The workers froze. The homeowner felt it too. A tremor that traveled through the soles of his shoes and into his bones. It wasn't an earthquake. It was something moving, something alive, something that had been disturbed when the oak was taken down. The rumble faded, leaving only the eerie silence of a neighborhood that suddenly didn't feel safe anymore. Whatever was under the ground wasn't finished, and the consequences were just beginning. The homeowner took one last look at the hollowed remains of the oak, the tree the HOA had been so desperate to destroy, and a realization took hold. They had removed the only barrier holding the danger in place, and soon, the entire neighborhood would understand the cost of their decision. The hours after the tree's removal felt unnaturally heavy, as if the neighborhood itself was holding its breath. The hollow stump sat like an open wound in the middle of the yard, exposing the network of tunnels that spiraled freely beneath the soil. The HOA, still congratulating themselves for enforcing their rule, had no idea what they had unleashed. By early afternoon, the workers had packed up and left, refusing to risk further disturbance. They had seen enough to know the ground was unstable. A report had been filed for an emergency soil inspection, but inspections took time. Time the neighborhood no longer had. Because as the sun dipped behind the houses, the ground began to shift. Barely noticeable at first. A subtle settling like the earth was exhaling. But to the homeowner, who had watched the yard for years, the change felt wrong. Too sudden. Too deep. The soft earth near the stump pulsed as if something beneath it was stretching outward, expanding, and then another tremor rippled quietly through the ground. The homeowner realized something else. The tunnels weren't just spreading outward. They were moving upward, slowly, almost intentionally. Across the street, a few neighbors stepped out to examine their yards. Some noticed small sinkholes forming, circular depressions in the grass, spaced far too evenly to be random. Others commented on cracks forming along their driveway edges. The HOA president, unaware or uninterested, strutted along the sidewalk with self-satisfaction. She saw only what she wanted. A tree removed, a rule enforced, another victory. She did not see the earth behind her dipping ever so slightly, following her steps like a shadow waiting for its moment. By evening, the soil inspector arrived. A man with years of experience and a face that instantly hardened when he saw the exposed tunnels. He didn't hide his concern. He circled the yard, studying the cracks, then knelt to examine the openings beneath the stump. He pushed his arm-length scope into one of the tunnels, and the monitor he carried flickered with an image that made him recoil. Deep within the ground, something glistened. A black, slick surface. Not roots, not soil. Something that throbbed faintly, expanding and contracting like living tissue. The inspector's demeanor changed immediately. He urged that no one walk near the stump or the spreading cracks. He recommended that multiple houses be temporarily evacuated. And he insisted that the HOA be notified immediately because their actions, their forced decision, had triggered a structural danger beneath the neighborhood. But the HOA president didn't accept that. She dismissed his warning, claiming he was exaggerating and that the community would not panic over dirt. She refused to authorize any neighborhood alert. That decision, made out of arrogance and pride, sealed what happened next as the night grew darker. The ground continued shifting. Small tremors shook quietly through the soil. A dog barked non-stop at the base of a fence until its owner dragged it inside. Porch lights flickered from vibration. The earth felt alive. Restless.it wasn't until midnight that the first major collapse happened. A neighbor's front yard sank nearly 2 feet in seconds, swallowing a section of walkway. The sound echoed like a muffled roar. Soil poured downward as if funneled into a void. The homeowner ran outside, stunned by the sight. The sinkhole was expanding, slow but unstoppable. Neighbors emerged in confusion and fear. Panic buzzed through the air as more cracks opened, reaching out like branches of a growing tree, except all the branches pointed toward one place: the HOA president's house. The homeowner understood the pattern now. The oak tree's roots had wrapped around this entire underground network, holding it stable. Without them, the tunnels had nothing keeping them from collapsing. The pressure underground had been building for years, pushing upward, searching for escape. The oak had been the barrier. The oak had been the seal. The HOA had ripped it out, and now the ground was failing. Another collapse thundered down the street. A parked SUV dropped partially into a sudden pit that yawned beneath it. Its front tires disappeared into the earth like it had been swallowed. Alarms blared through the neighborhood as the ground trembled again. Lights switched on in every home. People shouted. The HOA president stumbled out of her doorway, stunned by the chaos. She screamed orders no one listened to. She tried calling the HOA's emergency line, but the operator told her plainly that the collapse was natural soil destabilization caused by recent ground disturbance. Legally tied to the tree removal she had forced, she was responsible. Her signature was on the violation order. Her insistence had triggered the event, and now the damage was growing faster. The soil inspector returned with emergency personnel, urging everyone to evacuate. They marked danger zones, and every one of them pointed toward the same conclusion. The largest void was directly beneath the HOA president's property. The ground trembled again, harder this time. With a deep groan, the pavement along the street cracked and dipped. A piece of sidewalk slid downward, and then came the moment that shifted panic into full terror. A low, echoing roar vibrated from beneath the neighborhood. A guttural sound that didn't belong in the suburbs. The earth pulsed as if something enormous had shifted underground. The tunnels were no longer just collapsing. Something was pushing through them. The homeowner stared toward the HOA president's house just as a section of her front lawn sagged violently, sinking half a meter. Soil ruptured upward along the property line. The ground swelled, then fell, then swelled again. Something below was trying to reach the surface. The emergency crews shouted for everyone to retreat, but the vibration became relentless. Dirt trembled. Foundations cracked. Porch railings rattled. The president stumbled backward as her lawn buckled beneath her feet. The homeowner felt the instinctive fear rise, not because the ground was collapsing, but because what was causing it wasn't natural erosion anymore. Something else was down there. And the collapse wasn't stopping. It was accelerating. It was coming straight for her home. In the middle of the spiraling chaos, one realization cut through the fear. Whatever was beneath the tree was finally free, and the neighborhood was about to learn what the oak had been holding back. The aftermath of the sinkhole transformed Maple Ridge into a neighborhood living in constant tension. The once calm suburb now carried the weight of unresolved questions, scattered evidence, and a simmering anger directed toward the HOA board. The air felt different, thicker, heavier, because everyone knew the disaster wasn't just an accident. Something bigger had been set in motion, and the truth was pushing its way to the surface with the same unstoppable force that consumed the yard. The emergency response team had sealed off the area, but the giant pit remained an open wound on the neighborhood. Every day, more residents gathered at its edge, staring into the collapsed layers of soil that exposed a secret no one knew existed. The buried pipe system, long deteriorated, twisted downward like the ribs of some ancient beast. The damage suggested years of internal leaks, eroding the land from within. The HOA board tried desperately to regain control. They circulated emails filled with calm, empty reassurances, claiming the situation was being handled efficiently and fully assessed by professionals. But those phrases only sparked more suspicion. Residents murmured among themselves, sharing screenshots of archived HOA newsletters and broken promises about infrastructure inspections that were supposedly completed but clearly never happened. The truth had momentum now, and it was hungry. The city's engineering report arrived within days, landing like a hammer on the HOA board meetings. It revealed the exact cause of the sinkhole: severe pipe decay caused by years of ignored maintenance requests. The HOA had full responsibility over the internal drainage system beneath the street, and they had failed to authorize even a single inspection in the last 10 years, despite collecting yearly maintenance fees for the very purpose of those inspections. The community reacted with shock and fury. Homeowners confronted the board in packed meetings, their frustration echoing through the clubhouse walls. Recordings of these confrontations spread quickly, turning local residents into a unified force. They demanded accountability, transparency, and reparations for the damage caused, not just to the narrator's property, but to the entire neighborhood. The board members realized how cornered they were, but instead of admitting fault, they attempted to shift blame. They claimed the homeowner's tree must have weakened the soil over time. They argued that the tree roots had disrupted the underground structure. They even insinuated that cutting the tree, something they themselves forced, might have contributed to the collapse. But none of it held up. The engineering report contradicted every excuse. The residents didn't buy the lies anymore. Their patience had dissolved the moment they saw how deep the negligence ran. More documents surfaced, collected by residents who began digging through years of HOA paperwork. The truth painted a chilling picture. Not only had maintenance inspections been skipped, but the funds allocated for them had been diverted. Large sums of money had been transferred to accounts with unclear purposes. Signatures didn't match. Authorization notes were missing. The system was dirty from the inside, and the sinkhole had exposed more than just a physical weakness. It revealed corruption. Residents demanded a full financial audit. Lawsuits were filed. Lawyers representing multiple households began forming a collective case. The HOA board, once feared and unquestioned, now stood at the center of a growing storm that threatened to unravel everything they had built. Their authority had crumbled the same way the ground did. Suddenly, violently, and without recovery. Meanwhile, the homeowner's yard became the central point of investigation. City officials and insurance adjusters walked around with cameras and measuring tools, documenting every inch of the damage. The homeowner watched silently, feeling a mix of relief and exhaustion. The destruction of the tree still lingered as a painful memory, but now it had become a symbol. Evidence that the HOA's decisions weren't just unreasonable. They were dangerous. As investigations continued, the sinkhole deepened slightly, revealing an even larger void beneath the street. A repair project began, fenced off with bright orange barriers. Heavy machinery rolled in, and crews worked day and night to stabilize the ground. The cost of repairs escalated rapidly as engineers uncovered more pipe failures connected throughout the block. The total bill exceeded hundreds of thousands of dollars, and every dollar of it was charged to the HOA. Insurance refused to cover what was labeled preventable negligence, placing the full financial burden squarely on the board. The HOA budget was drained within weeks. Reserve funds disappeared. Special meetings were held in panic, but there were no solutions. The community refused to approve additional fees, arguing the board had no right to charge residents for damage caused by corruption and neglect. Under public pressure, every member of the HOA board resigned within a month. Their departure felt less like a choice and more like an inevitable collapse. Investigations continued, and law enforcement grew involved. There were whispers of charges being considered: fraud, embezzlement, and misconduct. The final blow came when the city council declared Maple Ridge under temporary municipal oversight. A new management company was appointed to rebuild the HOA from the ground up, with strict guidelines and transparent operations. Residents felt a sense of justice in watching the old regime fade into obscurity. For the homeowner, closure came slowly. The yard was eventually rebuilt, the ground reinforced, and new soil delivered to restore the landscape. It took months before the space felt like part of the home again. The tree, however, could not be replaced. But something else grew there instead: A quiet, powerful understanding of how fragile communities can be when systems fail and how quickly people can unite when truth finally takes shape. The neighborhood was forever changed, not because of the sinkhole, but because of what it revealed. The HOA had forced the tree to fall. But in the end, it was their own foundation that collapsed beneath them.